Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec, and in this video we're going to learn how to play Dune Imperium, which is a very interesting mix of worker placement, deck building and area control. Here's how it plays. Dune Imperium is the game set in the Dune universe. Each player represents a powerful house and each player has a leader from that house. And these houses compete with each other. All players, all houses will send their agents to these action spaces based on the cards they have, and both the card and the action space are important. You will increase your influence in these four major factions, and this is a significant source of victory points. You will also use these armies in this conflict area and will try to win the conflicts, which may also bring additional victory points. So this game is a combination of worker placement, deck building and also the area control. To set the game up, place this manted to this space on the game board and 4 alliance tokens on the designated spaces on the alliance tracks. Then prepare the conflict deck. Separate these conflict cards by the number on their back, and then take all cards with the number 3, 5 cards with number 2, and 1 card with number 1. Shuffle all the cards with number 3 and place them on the bottom of the deck. Shuffle the cards with number 2 and place them on top of the cards with the number 3, and then place the card with the number 1 on top. Take this deck of conflict cards and place them on this space on the game board. Shuffle this deck of Intrigue cards and place them somewhere next to the game board. And now separate these Imperium cards by their type. These cards with the black background behind their name and with this little arrow in front of the name are starting player cards. These cards with the white background behind their names are reserve cards, and the remaining cards are Imperium cards. So shuffle the deck of the Imperium cards, place the deck next to the game board, and draw the first 5 cards face up. Place the reserve cards nearby. You don't need to shuffle those cards because all the cards of the same type are the same. Each player takes 1 player board, and make sure for a first game you take the player board with 1 dot over here. In subsequent games you can take player boards with 2 or 3 dots. And each player will also take these exact 10 starting cards. Shuffle them and create the draw deck. And place the draw deck to the left side of your player board. Then take 1 water resource and all the components of 1 color. Now take 1 of your agents and place it somewhere near this Swordmaster action space. Then take 7 cubes and this combat marker and place 3 cubes in one of the circles in this combat area and place the combat marker on the 0 space of this track. And 1 cube in the starting position on each of these influence tracks of all 4 factions in the game. Finally, place the scoring disc on the 0 space of the scoring track. However, in a 4-player game, all players start the game with 1 point. Randomly determine the starting player who will take this start player token, and we're ready to go. There are some small adjustments for a 2-player setup. I will talk about the 2-player game at the end of the video. The game is played in rounds, and you will play maximum 10 rounds because there are 10 cards in this conflict deck. But the game can finish earlier than that if any player reaches 10 victory points or more. Each round consists of 5 phases. In the first phase, you reveal the next conflict card, and each player will draw 5 cards from their draw deck. Then in the second phase, players will take turns, starting with the first player and then continuing in a clockwise direction. On their turns, players will place their agents on the game board based on the card they choose. They can only place an agent on an action space which has the same symbol as one of the symbols on the card. After placing an agent to the action space, you can take the corresponding action. When all your agents are already on the game board, you have to play a reveal turn, in which you take all the cards from your hand, play them in front of you, and based on these symbols at the bottom of the card, and especially these numbers, you can buy new cards from the Imperium row or from the reserve. Then in the third phase you resolve this conflict based on their strength, players will receive the rewards from the conflict card. And then in the fourth phase, you will add spies to all the action spaces without agents. And finally, the fifth phase is the cleanup phase and the preparation for the next round. The object of the game is to have the most victory points, and this is the symbol for the victory points. And if any player reaches 10 victory points, or if the draw deck of this conflict cards runs out, the game will be over. The main source of the victory points are these factions and their influence tracks. Whenever you reach the second space on each influence track, you score 1 victory point. And the first player to reach this space of each track gains this alliance token, which is also worth 1 victory point. You can also earn victory points from winning the conflicts. And you can also score a victory point by buying this card from the reserve. And there are also some other card effects which may give you victory points over the course of the game. After the end of game is triggered, finish the round, and whoever has the most victory points is the winner. So at the start of each round, in the first phase, first remove the conflict card from the previous round, and then reveal the new conflict card from the draw deck. Then each player will draw 5 cards from their draw deck. Put those cards into your hand and keep them hidden from other players. When you have to draw the card and your draw deck is empty, reshuffle all the cards in your discard pile and only in the discard pile, not the cards from anywhere in play, and create the new draw deck. Then in the second phase, players will take turns, starting with the first player and then continuing in a clockwise direction. On your turn, you only have 2 options. You can either place one of your agents, or you can play a so-called reveal turn. When placing an agent, first play 1 card from your hand, then place the agent on an action space and make sure that the symbol on the action space matches one of the symbols on the card. The second option is the reveal turn. As indicated by its name, you take all the cards from your hand, reveal all those cards and play them in front of you. You will have a chance to buy new cards from the Imperium row or from the reserve. And with that, your round is over. If you have any unplaced agents, you won't be able to place them this round. And once all players perform the reveal turn, you will proceed to the combat phase. Now I will explain the agent turns and the reveal turns in more detail. When taking the agent's turn, first choose and play 1 card from your hand. And again, this card is called in play. And then you can send your agent to an action space. It must be an unoccupied action space, and the symbol of that action space must match one of the symbols on the card you have just played. If there are any resources shown below the symbol of that action space, you have to pay those resources as additional cost. Here it's 1 water drop, over here it would be 2 water drops. So you must have those resources in your personal supply and put them to the general supply. And this particular action space has additional requirement. You have to have at least 2 influence with this faction. Then you can perform the action of that action space 1 time. Here you would take all the available resources. In addition to that, you can take all the bonuses from this gray bar on the card you have just played. If the card is this signet ring card and has this ring symbol, you can take the bonus depicted on your leader card. In this case it would be another spice. You can take the action and bonus from the gray bar in any order you want. When the card says you have to trash the card, remove that card from the game. The only exception to this rule are these fold space cards. Anytime you have to trash that card, return it back to this reserve pile. If the card has no symbols, like in this case, you may not use that card for placing your agent. You can only use that card during the reveal turn. The symbols at the bottom of the card in this blue area are only relevant during the reveal turn. Apart from this signet special ability, your leader also has a permanent ability, so make sure you are familiar with that. You can find a detailed description of all the action spaces in the rulebook, but let me briefly explain all of them right now. And we will start with these factions. Every time you take an action in a faction, gain 1 influence, which means move your cube 1 space up, and when you reach this second space, you gain 1 victory point immediately. Then, when you gain 4 influence, first take the benefit shown on that space, and the first player to reach 4 influence in a faction will take this alliance token, which is worth 1 victory point. All other players who reach this space will take the benefit. However, in order to take the alliance token away from the player who currently controls that alliance token, the other player must reach higher space on this influence track. In this example, green player would take the possession of this alliance token, which means yellow player would lose this victory point and green player will gain that victory point. So as long as you reach the top space of the influence track, no other player would be able to take the alliance token away from you. When you place your agent in this action space, you have to pay 4 spice as additional cost, and then you gain 5 solari, which is a currency in this game. You take 2 cubes, 2 armies, and 1 intrigue card from the intrigue draw deck. I will describe armies and intrigue cards in a minute. In this action space, you simply take 2 coins or 2 solari. In this action space again, you have to pay 6 spice, and then you immediately gain 5 armies and 2 water drops. In this action space, as this symbol indicates, you take 1 full space card and put it into your discard pile. You take that card for free, there's no additional cost. In this action space, again you have to pay 2 spice, and then you can trash a card and draw 2 new cards from your draw deck. In this action space, you gain 1 additional intrigue card, and if any other player has 4 or more intrigue cards in their hand, you take 1 random card from their hand and put it into your hand. This prevents other players from hoarding these intrigue cards. In this action space, you simply take 2 armies, and in a final action space, you take 1 water. Anytime you take an intrigue card, put it into your hand, and again, keep it secret from other players. There are 3 types of intrigue cards in the deck. These ones with the name plot at the bottom of the card can only be used during this second phase, during the action phase. This one with the combat keyword can only be used during the third phase, during the conflict or combat phase. And there are only 2 cards with this endgame keyword. These cards are scoring cards, and you can score additional victory points if you fulfill the conditions on those cards. There is no limit to the number of intrigue cards you can have in your hand. During this second phase, you can play as many plot cards as you want, and each plot card you play is removed from the game. This symbol allows you to trash a card, and over here you can draw 2 new cards, and you can find the same symbol on some cards in the gray bar as the bonus action. Again, it's optional. However, when you see these words, trash this card, that's not optional, that's mandatory. Now, when you decide to use this ability, trashing the card, you can trash the card from your hand, you can trash the card which is in play or from your discard pile. You may not trash the card from your draw deck. When you trash the card is removed from the game. Again, the only exception is this fault space card. When you trash that card, it's returned back to its respective pile in the reserve. When you place your agent on the combat action space, it's an action space with the combat symbol and with this desert background like over here, you may deploy your troops to the conflict area. First, these cubes represent armies. If you gain any armies from the action space or from the card you have just played this turn, you can take all these armies from your personal supply and place any number of them to this conflict area. You can place all of them, some of them, or even none of them. If you don't want to place them to the conflict, you can keep them in the garrison. In addition to all the armies you have gained from the action space or from the card, you can add up to 2 more armies from your garrison to the conflict area. You may add 1 or 2 or even none of them if you don't want to. You can even add these up to 2 armies from the garrison to the conflict when you take this combat action space, which gives you no armies at all. However, since it's the combat action space, you can add up to 2 troops from the garrison to the conflict. To finalize this example, when you take this action, since it's not a combat action space, You gain 4 armies, however you can only add them to the garrison. Now these action spaces, these brown ones, are called desert action spaces and they give you spice. You take this base value plus all the accumulated spice on these additional spots. So in this example it would be 3 plus 2, 5 spice. Here you only gain 3 coins or solari. Over here you have to pay certain amount of spice from 2 to 5 and you gain corresponding number of solari. These dark blue action spaces are called Populated Areas and first 2 of them have additional requirements. This one requires you to have at least 2 influence with the first faction, the Freeman faction, and over here you have to pay 2 water drops. All of these spaces are combat spaces and the only symbol we have not mentioned yet is this one. This means you take 3 cards from your draw deck and you put them into your hand. And the last section is this green section, Landsraad Council. This action space can only be used once per game, and when you place your agent there and pay 5 solari, take this token, the Councillor token, place it in one of these empty spaces near the High Council, and as of now you will have permanently 2 additional persuasion points which you can use at the end of the turn to buy cards. When you place your agent over here and pay 2 solari, this action space is called Mented. You draw a card, take this Mented meeple. Place that Mented next to your leaderboard and it acts as additional agent, your agent of your color, for the remainder of the round. When you use this action space and pay 4 solari, you simply gain 4 armies which you have to place in the garrison. Over here you take 1 army and you have 1 persuasion point at the end of your round. And over here, again, you can only take this once per game. You have to pay 8 solari from your personal reserve. And then you can take that 3rd agent which is waiting somewhere next to this action space. And this agent is now permanently added to your reserve, so you can use 3 agents per round and you can use this new one even in the current round. If you don't have any more remaining agents, or if you have but you don't want to play them, you will have to play a reveal turn. Take all the cards from your hand and reveal them, place them in front of you in the play area, and resolve all the effects at the bottom of those cards in this blue area. You will gain these persuasion points which are used for buying cards. You will get some spice, combat symbols or some other special effects. You also have to set your combat strength now. For each cube you have in the conflict area, so not in the garrison but in a conflict, you take 2 combat points, so in this case it would be 6 combat points. And then add any sword symbols from the cards you have revealed. Not the cards you have played during the round, only from the cards you have revealed. In this case it's 1 symbol, so the combat strength would be increased to 7. You must have at least 1 cube in the conflict, otherwise those sword symbols don't count. Now sum up all these blue persuasion points and potentially add those 2 persuasion points from the High Council. And now you can buy cards from the Imperium row or from the reserve. The price of each card is shown in the top right corner. And you can buy as many cards as you want or as you can afford, but you are not required to spend all your persuasion points. In fact, if you don't want to, you don't have to buy any cards. Now, the cards you buy are placed in your discard pile, and then immediately refill the empty space. And if you have any persuasion points available, you can continue buying additional cards. Some cards, usually the high value cards, give you immediate benefit when you buy these cards. This is a one-time bonus and you can find their explanation in the rulebook. When you manage to buy the Spice Must Flow card from the reserve, again it has immediate 1 victory point bonus for you, but then the card has no symbols, so it's pretty much useless in the deck. Then take all the cards you have revealed and played during that round, place them on your discard pile, and with that your round is over, and when all players perform this reveal turn, the entire second phase is over. The third phase of each round is a combat phase, and you will resolve this conflict. In general, high strength wins the combat and wins the first prize from the conflict card. However, before resolving the combat, players will have a chance to play the combat intrigue cards, starting with the first player and then continuing in a clockwise direction. These combat cards may only be used by players involved in the conflict. So those are players who have cubes in the conflict area. Each player has two options, either play the card or pass. Playing the card usually adds additional combat strength, in this case it would be 4 swords. So the combat strength would be increased by 4. And when you pass, you still have a chance to play the card later if the round comes back to you. So if the green player in this example would play the combat card and increase their strength, it's now back to yellow player, blue player, and so on and so forth, and only when all 3 players pass consecutively, this step of playing the intrigue cards is over. When you play a combat card which allows you to retreat your troops from the conflict, move those troops back to your garrison, and if the number of your troops drops down to 0, your strength is down to 0 as well. You are basically out of the conflict. Remember, you have to have some cubes in the conflict area to be involved in the conflict. Now, when you're done playing the conflict cards, the player with the highest strength wins the conflict and gains the reward from the first space. The player with the second strength gains the second reward, and in a 2 and a 3 player game, only first 2 rewards are given out. In 4 player game, the player in the third position would gain the reward from the third place. In case of a tie, both players gain the lower reward. In this example, both second and third player would gain the third reward. If there was a tie for the first place, let's say these 2 players would be tied for first and second place, they would both gain the reward from the second space. The third player would take the third reward. If the conflict card is a battle for a specific space, in this case it's Imperial Basin, that is also indicated by this symbol, the winner of that conflict places their control marker in the designated space of that action space. If that action space would contain a control marker of another player, return that marker to its owner. Now, anytime any player would take an action on this action space, the owner of this control marker would take the bonus depicted, even if that action space is actually taken by the same player. Even in that case, that player takes that bonus. At the end of the combat, all cubes that were in the conflict are returned back to their owners, and return all the combat markers to the 0 space. Now we can move to the phase number 4. The 4th and 5th phase of the round are very short administration phases. In the phase number 4, any desert space which doesn't have an agent there, so which is unoccupied, will gain 1 additional spice to this maker's space. This way it's getting more attractive for players. In the 5th phase, the recall phase, first check if any player reached 10 victory points or more. If they did, it triggers the end of the game. Similarly, if this would be the last conflict card in game, that would also trigger the end of the game. If not, then return Manted to its space. All players take all their agents back and pass the first player marker to the next player clockwise. If the end of the game is triggered either by someone reaching the 10 victory points or more, or because there are no more conflict cards available, so you have already played 10 rounds, the game ends. If any player has any intrigue cards with the endgame keyword and fulfills the condition on the card, add the victory points from those cards as well, and then the player with the most points is the winner. In case of a tie, the player with the most spice is the winner. If you would be wondering what this intrigue card is for, it's exactly for breaking the tie at the end of the game. If that doesn't break the tie, then the number of solary, water, and finally number of troops in the garrison breaks the tie. For a 2-player game, you will have to choose a third color as the third virtual player in the game. Place the cubes of this virtual player on these influence tracks, but don't place any cubes in the garrison. Shuffle this deck of House Hagal cards, but take out the cards with this 1-player symbol in the top right hand corner. During each round, this Hagal player will always play after the first player. So that virtual player will always be the second player in the turn order. And that player will take as many turns as the first player. So if in this example the red player would have 3 agents already, and the first player would only have 2 agents, the virtual player will also take only 2 turns. However, if the first player would have 3 agents already, the Hagal player would also take 3 turns in the given round. Now, after first player takes the action, and it's the Hagal's player's turn, reveal the top card from the Hagal deck, and if the action space shown on the card is unoccupied, send the virtual player agent to that action space. Ignore all the additional costs and benefits of that action space, instead, only resolve the effects of the Hagal card. If the card has a faction symbol, advance the token on the influence track 1 space. If it contains armies, add those armies to the combat area. If the action space is not a combat space, the armies will go to the garrison. If the action space would be a combat space, they would be added to the conflict area. If the revealed card contains an action space which is already occupied, ignore the card and draw another card. If the action space would be a combat space, you can deploy up to 2 armies from the garrison to the conflict area. Then at the end of the round, Hagal player doesn't take any reveal turn, but when Hagal has any armies in the conflict, reveal the top card from the deck. If it has any sword symbols, add those symbols to the combat strength, and then players involved in a combat may play Intrigue cards. After that, resolve the combat normally. However, Hagal doesn't take any rewards from the cards, it just plays the spoiler role, and since this is a 2-player game, only the first 2 rewards are given out. Hagal player doesn't collect any resources or cards or victory points, however, it advances normally on the influence track and may even take the alliance token. So that's it, that's how you play Dune Imperium. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer your questions. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can even support the channel on the Patreon page. My name is Branislav Berec, you've been watching Game in a Nutshell, and hope to see you next time.